Imagine this for a second. A massive, brutalist steel door buried deep in the frozen rock of an Arctic mountain. Violent snowstorms screaming across a completely desolate island at the edge of the world. And quietly sitting behind that door, millions of tiny, fragile packets of life. Stacked in the pitch black, holding the genetic blueprint of literally every meal you have ever eaten. Welcome to our explainer on the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. It is easily one of the most mythologized, secretive facilities on Earth. People call it humanity's backup hard drive, a literal physical fortress of ice and steel, precision engineered to survive the end of the world as we know it.
Naturally, a place this dramatic, this isolated, it generates a ton of noise. You've almost certainly seen the terrifying headlines or the endless spiraling online chatter. Everyone's asking the exact same question. Is this just a doomsday bunker for billionaires? A clandestine, heavily guarded vault where tech elites and the ultra-rich are quietly hoarding the absolute last seeds of human civilization, just waiting to control the food supply when society eventually collapses? I mean, it's a wildly cinematic idea, right? It definitely gets clicks.
But what if the reality behind that frozen steel door is totally different? What if the actual truth is far stranger, way more complex, and vastly more critical to our survival than any internet conspiracy theory? Today, we are completely stripping away the myths. We're going deep inside the geopolitics, the massive money, the hidden vulnerabilities, and the quiet, high-stakes power struggles that are actively deciding who truly controls the future of our food.
Let's start with Section 1, the sovereign reality, not a private hoard.
Now, before we even touch on the power dynamics or the billionaires, we have to shatter the absolute biggest misconception right out of the gate. This is not a privately owned bunker. Not even close. The vault is a sovereign facility owned by Norway. And what's really interesting about this legal setup is a strict, ironclad framework known as black box conditions. Basically, if a country or a sovereign research lab deposits seeds into Svalbard, they, and literally only they, retain absolute 100% legal ownership of those seeds. Nobody else is allowed to withdraw them. Not the billionaires, not the management trust, not even the Norwegian government itself. The vault is just a locked door, and only the original depositor holds the key.
And the sheer scale of what is locked behind those black box rules, it is staggering. We are talking about more than 1.3 million completely distinct seed varieties, perfectly sealed in custom foil packages and suspended at a constant, unforgiving -18 degrees Celsius. They are buried so deeply within that mountain that the natural Arctic permafrost basically acts as a passive freezer. So even if every single mechanical cooling system goes offline, the dense rock and glacial ice will naturally keep those seeds frozen. It is a genuine, heavily fortified biological fortress.
Which brings us to Section 2. The hidden architecture, a global network.
To actually understand how this works, you have to realize Svalbard isn't some isolated standalone arc. The vault is actually just one node, a quiet, frozen, highly secretive node in a massive and incredibly fragile global network. Think about the number 1,700. There are over 1,700 active crop gene banks actively operating right now, spread across the entire planet. These facilities, they are humanity's active hard drives. Svalbard is merely the off-site backup server. It's the ultimate contingency file we pray we never actually have to open.
And those 1,700 active hard drives don't just operate in a vacuum. They are bound together by an incredibly complex set of international rules, specifically the FAO International Treaty, which established a multilateral system covering 64 of our most critical food and forage crops. This isn't just paperwork. It dictates standard, binding contracts on exactly how genetic material can be shared for research and breeding, deliberately locking out industrial or pharmaceutical uses. So while it sits in the Arctic, this treaty quietly and permanently hardwires Svalbard into a global web of power, literally deciding who gets to touch the seeds and exactly what they're allowed to do with them.
Section 3. The philanthropic choke point, funding versus control.
So, if the global elite don't own the seeds, and they definitely don't own the mountain, why are their names constantly, endlessly linked to this facility? Well, it's because massive private philanthropy dramatically shapes the invisible systems wrapped around it. Let's follow the money for a second. Back in 2007, an unbelievable sum of $45 million was injected into a massive emergency crop diversity rescue initiative. $37.5 million of that cash came straight from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, with the other $7.5 million chipped in by the Norwegian government. This was a totally unprecedented tidal wave of funding aimed directly at agricultural conservation.
So the crucial point is understanding what that $45 million actually bought. It absolutely did not buy ownership. What it bought was logistics. It secured endangered, dying seed collections in developing nations. It built the massive complex digital data systems required to catalog them, and it directly funded the massive logistical effort to ship 450,000 vital samples up to the Arctic. But think about the power dynamic there. Whoever funds that global supply chain essentially gets to decide which crops are labeled urgent and which data systems become the underlying backbone for all future global research. That is an almost unfathomable level of structural influence.
Move into Section 4. Options, not objects. The geopolitics of seeds.
If you want to understand the modern geopolitics of food, you have to stop looking at these seeds as static museum exhibits. They are dynamic, highly valuable options on our future survival. They're the raw biological code we need to outrun climate collapse and devastating new crop diseases. The true pipeline of power isn't a vault, it's a four-step process. You sequence the genetic data, you aggressively breed new climate-resistant varieties, you test those traits out in the real world, and then finally, you regulate and commercialize the resulting crops. The real geopolitical leverage? It isn't in hoarding the physical seeds, it's in monopolizing the R&D toolkit required to turn dormant genetic code into tomorrow's multi-billion-dollar food supply.
Section 5. Cracks in the ice. System stress tests.
It's so easy to look at this facility and think of it as untouchable, just resting safely and perfectly preserved above a chaotic world. But the reality on the ground is way more tense. Back in 2017, the changing climate literally delivered a crisis right to the vault's front door. The Arctic, which was chosen specifically to be a forever freezer, was warming up. Meltwater actually breached the outer entrance tunnel. Norway's public building agency had to scramble. They rushed in, ripped out internal heat sources, aggressively waterproofed the tunnel walls, and had to carve out massive exterior drainage ditches. Now, the water never actually reached the seeds themselves, but the symbolism was incredibly chilling. It proved that even humanity's absolute ultimate backup file requires constant, expensive human engineering and public spending just to survive our rapidly warming planet.
But look, despite all those terrifying vulnerabilities, there is a profound reason we maintain this massive, expensive effort. Because eventually, the absolute unthinkable actually happens, and that disaster insurance policy has to be cashed in. And that brings us to the single most important, defining moment in the entire history of the Seed Vault, a moment born directly out of the unimaginable devastation of the Syrian civil war.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why the vault exists in the first place. As war utterly devastated the critical ICARDA gene bank in Aleppo, Syria, decades of absolutely priceless agricultural conservation were teetering on the brink of being completely wiped out. So ICARDA was forced to do something unprecedented. They executed the very first withdrawal of seeds from Svalbard. They pulled their backups out of the ice, and they used them to successfully, painstakingly rebuild their entire operations from scratch in Lebanon and Morocco. The system worked perfectly, exactly as it was designed to, saving a shattered institution from the brink of total erasure.
Section 6. The true battle for food. So, when we strip away the conspiracy theories, the cinematic noise, and the dramatic headlines, what are we left with? We have to force a complete narrative shift here. On one side, you have the myth, a clandestine, private bunker where shadowy billionaires are hoarding our final seeds to build a total monopoly. Total fiction. On the other side, we have the reality, a sovereign Norwegian facility governed by strict international treaties, a passive, sleeping backup that heavily relies on a massive, vulnerable network of 1,700 global gene banks, all kept afloat by highly strategic and deeply influential philanthropy.
Because as we look to the future, the real battlefields are shifting right under our feet. The next frontiers of global power are going to demand absolute transparency in exactly who is funding this intricate system. We are facing massive systemic risks if too few donors hold all the purse strings. But most importantly, the fight is rapidly moving away from physical seeds entirely. The new war is over who controls the digital sequence data, who drives the trait discovery, and the aggressive race for downstream commercialization and patents. That is where the ultimate power of tomorrow actually lies.
The Svalbard Global Seed Vault is an undeniable triumph of international cooperation. It is a striking mirror reflecting exactly how far we're willing to go to protect our shared future. But the deepest, most critical game being played right now isn't about a frozen steel door in the Arctic rock. The real question you need to be asking yourself the next time you hear about this incredible secretive facility is this: who truly controls the digital data? Who commands the research funding and the vast scientific infrastructure? Ultimately, who writes the hidden rules for the seeds that will decide who eats and who starves in the world we are hurtling toward?